ultimate guide to knitting for beginners everywhere. Hello lovelies, welcome to Amy of Melbourne. My name is Amy, obviously, and today we are in fact looking at all things knitting. I'm going to take you through the basic stitches, how to cast on and cast off, the different types of fun things that you can add into your knitting journey, the types of yarn you can use, the needles you can use, as well as tips and tricks to help you on your way in your knitting journey to do it properly. Make sure that you use the chapters down below so that you can find exactly what you need. But if you are starting out on your knitting journey and this is the first video, watch the whole thing through and then come back to the bits you need as you're actually starting to knit. That will make sure that everything makes sense before you actually get started. So without further ado, let's get into the learning. Knitting is made up of two different basic stitches. The first is called knit stitch, that's what you can see here, and it looks like V's. On the back side, you can see the other stitch, which is the purl stitch, and it creates these little bumps, which we call purl bumps that look like pearls. They are in fact the same stitch. It's just either the front or the back that shows. If you work the stitch one way, you will get your regular knit stitches like you have here in the rib, and if you flip the way you stitch it, you will get purl stitches. That's how we create the different texture. But if you look at a knit stitch on the back, you will see it's simply just a purl stitch the other way around, and the same for a purl stitch. Once you know how to do a knit stitch, then doing a purl stitch is easy. It can be trickier depending on how you hold the needles, but I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can hold your needles. Find the one that works best for you and is the most comfortable. If you only work a knit stitch or only work a purl stitch back and forth on both sides of your work, then you will get a fabric that looks like this. In between the purl bumps, you can see there actually are V's. That's because this is just done in knit stitch on both sides. So when you flip it over, the purls are still on the back. So you can see them on both sides and they tend to cover up that knitted V stitches. You can see here that I've done a couple of extra rows of knitting before I've gone back to the opposite purl. And you can see that it's the same thing, they're just spaced further apart. And then when you flip it to the other side, it looks like there's lots of purl stitches and just a couple of rows of knit stitches because they are the opposite of each other, the inverse. All you need to start knitting is a pair of needles of some kind and also some yarn. I highly recommend that you start with actual wool. It doesn't have to be super expensive. It can be the most basic, but pure wool works the best, particularly when you're learning. There are lots of different methods to cast on and start your knitting. I'm going to show you two basic ways to start. The first, you're starting with a slip knot, leave a little bit of a tail, create an X around your fingers, and then pop the main yarn up through, and that creates the knot. Then take one of your needles and put it into that loop and pull to tighten. You don't want it super tight, just snug. Then you're going to take your yarn, the one that's coming out from the ball, not this tail, and you're going to put your thumb on top, wrap it. It creates a little loop and an X underneath. You're going to put your needle through there, take your thumb out and pull down. Don't make it too tight. So again, thumb down, wrap it around, into the loop, off, around, in, off, around, in, off. And there you have your first cast on stitches. You can see there is this ridge here of the stitches. It's important that this stays straight. If it starts to twist around like this, then your stitches are going to turn out really strange, and if you ever need to attach or join in the round, it won't work. It will mean that they'll be twisted around each other and they'll never lay flat. So now that this cast on is done, we're going to turn our work over, and this needle goes into our non-dominant hand, and we get our second needle in our dominant hand, and we're going to create stitches. We're going to start with knit stitches. Knit stitches are worked from the front, and they are the front side of knitting. So we have our loop that's wrapped around this first needle. We're then going to take our dominant needle and we're going to put it from the front into this loop. You're not putting it between the loops, you're putting it actually into that loop behind your non-dominant needle to create an X. This is where it feels a bit tricky because you have to let that one go. If you're at a table, it will rest, but I also like to put my finger behind it and my thumb on top of the X so that they don't come apart. We're then going to take this bit of yarn that's coming from our ball. We're going to go around the back and through the X, through the middle of it, and put it down. So now it's just slid underneath the X and it's laying on top of our loop that was already on the needles. And now we're going to create a new loop. So using our dominant needle, our moving needle, we're going to put that down into that loop. And we're going to create a new loop by pulling that yarn that was over the top out through that first loop. See how now it's got a second loop sitting there? So we have our first loop here that's wrapped around our non-dominant needle. And then we have this new loop that we've just pulled out using our knitting needle. And then to finish creating this stitch, we need to take our former loop that's on the non-dominant needle and chuck it off. So off it goes. So now those two loops are linked together. And now we're going to move across our previous row of loops, adding new loops on top of each one or into each one. So we're going to go from the front to the back, making an X through the loop. We'll take our yarn around through our X and down, pull the loop out and chuck the old loop off. Into the loop, to the back, making an X, take our yarn, wrap it down onto the loop, use your needle to pull that into a new loop and chuck the old one off. And that is your basic knit stitch. In, around, through, off. If you wait to the end of the video or skip to it, then I have a couple of little rhymes that you can use to remember this movement. In, around, out, off. Because of the cast on method we used for this sample, these stitches, this first row of stitches, can be a bit tricky to get into. They get tighter as we add more stitches in. For our final loop, which is actually our original slip knot, around, loop out and off. And now our dominant needle is full, our non-dominant is empty. So we're going to flip this needle. It becomes our non-dominant hand needle and our empty one goes to our dominant hand. And then we repeat the exact same thing, working from the dominant side across the non-dominant side. If you are right-handed, this is working right to left. If you're left-handed, it's working the other way. If you are left-handed, go to the end of the video where I'm going to flip the screen so that you can see how to do this and you can mirror it if you're left-handed. So that is the knit stitch. The backside of a knit stitch is actually a purl stitch. It's what you can see here because I've popped my needle over. When I'm looking at it from this side, I can see little V's. When I turn it over, I can see bumps. So to create a purl stitch, which is the other stitch we use in knitting to create texture and patterns, instead of going from the front to the back, for this, we go back to front. It pops out the front there. We wrap it around, same as before. We're going to pull up a loop, but it goes to the back instead of to the front. And then we throw off the previous loop again. So from the back through to the front, it still creates that V. Our yarn is in the front. we're wrapping it between the X into that loop. We pull the loop out using our working needle and chuck our previous stitch loop off. So in, around, out, off. In, around, out, off. And the same thing, you get to the very end of the row and it's still the same stitch. In, around, out, off. So now when we have a look, we can see there are 2 sets of bumps all lined up together. And when I flip this over, you can see that there are more curly but lovely V stitches. All these lovely V's. There are different positions you can hold your hands in with your needles so that you are more comfortable, and there's no right way of doing it. It's just whatever works for you. The way I've been doing so far is English knitting. It's not my usual style, but a lot of new beginners find it easier. This is where you hold your hands over the top of both of the needles. When you put your needle in, you have to let go of your working needle in your dominant hand to put your yarn around, and then you take it off. And you have to use these fingers to pinch and hold your needles together. Another way of holding your needles is my preferred way, and that is Irish lever knitting. And this is where your dominant hand is held underneath of your needle and you wrap the yarn. There are lots of different ways to wrap, but rather than picking up the yarn, you're going to lever your hand forward and pop it around. So for me, lever, off, wrap around, in, lever around, through, off. You can also hold your yarn in the opposite hand, in your non-dominant hand, and this is continental knitting. And there are a couple of ways to do this as well. The most common is to wrap the yarn over your finger and hold it out. You then use your dominant hand to pass through that stitch the same way, find the thread, the yarn on your finger, and pull it into that loop and then off. Continental knitting means that the needle itself is doing a lot of the work, and that's the movement that's creating the loops, rather than English or Irish where your hand puts the loop on. In this, the needle is finding the loop. The other type of continental knitting is picking, which is Norwegian style of knitting, and it's common in other places as well. And it works very similar to continental, but rather than having your finger up and finding the thread through the tension there, you're going to go through the front and you're literally going to pick it, scrape it off your finger gently, and then off. So in, grab it, off again. In, grab it, off again. If you can get the tension right, this is by far the fastest way. When you're purling, you of course need to bring your yarn across to the front. If you're purling and you're doing English style knitting, you simply come up behind the yarn, and that's how you are able to purl. The yarn's just in front and you pick it up the same way and you wrap it the same way. When you're doing lever knitting, like I do, or Irish knitting, this can feel a bit strange because you don't quite know where to go when you're looking at it, but you just bring it through the center between the two needles before you start your stitch, and then you're ready to go in the front. Put it through the front, and again it's the same movement around and off. If you're doing Norwegian continental knitting, it works a little differently. Then we need to do a little dance. So Norwegian is the hardest one to learn, but it's actually really fantastic. So we have to have the tension right, which I struggle with. You're going from the back, between these two, through the back. Then you're going to pick off or wrap around your thread, and then you're going to come back out and then off. So we're coming around the back, wrap it, out the back, off the top, around the back, wrap it, back through the back and off. And it creates the same looking pearl stitches, but it's a very different way of doing them. I find that they're a much looser stitch, you can also see, compared to my other stitches. Lever knitting is my most consistent, probably because I practice it. Continental is really tight, and then Norwegian for me is quite loose. Once I've got a little bit more on there, you can really see how one side looks like these and the other side looks like little pearl bumps. And if I was to make a mistake, you'd really be able to see it, or on purpose, change which side I'm doing which type of stitch on. That's how we create lots of different looking fabrics, is by switching which side we put the pearls or the V's of a knit stitch and a pearl stitch. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to do increases and decreases. We're going to start with some decreases. The easiest way to decrease a stitch is to stitch two of your stitches together. So rather than putting your needle into one stitch, we're actually going to put our needle into two stitches at the same time, and then we'll go around and create one new stitch from those two. So there are two now stitched together, two rows pulled into one. That's the easiest way of doing a knit together or to decrease by one. You can also do a slip knit. This is asked for, and it makes this lean look like it's going the other way. So to do this, you put it in the same way you normally would, just start off a stitch, but you just slip it across to the other needle, and then you do the same thing again, slip, then you put them back onto the first needle, and now they're all wonky and weird feeling, and then you again knit through both of them the same way you normally would do a knit, but through two stitches, and that's all it is. And now it looks like the other thread, the other stitch is on top, and it sort of makes it look like it's leaning the other way. It is more of an aesthetic thing. It doesn't make any difference to the wearability of anything, but it does look slightly nicer, particularly on something like a pair of socks or on yokes of raglan sleeve sweaters and things like that. It can look a little bit nicer. So let's go to our other side, our pearl side, and I'll show you how to do a pearl together. So to pearl together, it works the same as the knit two together. You're just going to go from the back through the front like a normal pearl stitch, but through two of the stitches. Oh, you're being very unkind to me. You're going to go from the back through the front, pearl-wise, through two stitches, through two loops, around and off. So now we have less stitches, and you can see that my piece of fabric is much wider here where I started than where I am now at my needles. To increase again, there are a couple of ways to do it. The first is to do a yarn over. This creates a hole in the fabric though, so if you have a look at lace knitting, which is in this video, then that will show you how that's done. If you don't want to create a hole, there are a couple of ways of doing an increase. The first and easiest way is you're going to pull up a loop. So in between these stitches that are on my needles, there is this loop down here. It's between the stitches, but if you pull that up and pop it over the top of your non-working needle, non-dominant hand, then you can actually use that as an extra stitch, and all of a sudden you have created a new stitch. Still work it the same way, from the front to the back, around, out, off, and look, you've got a whole new stitch. The other way you can do it is a little bit more complicated. We're going to go through the front, around, out, and then we stop. We don't take the yarn off, and instead we're going to go and put our needle in through the back here. Front to back of that same previous stitch that we've already stitched into, loop around again and out, and this time we're going to take it off, and that creates a slightly less noticeable increase. So let's do it again. In, around, out, not off. In through the very back of the loop, just here, in, around, out. Now we've got 2 loops, we'll take the old loop off. And then we have our increases done. So you can see where all the stitches have gone a little bit funky through here, where we've added some and taken some off, and then you just need to keep working through. So those are some basic ways that you can increase and decrease your work and add more or take away some stitches as you're creating your fabric. These are of course not the only ways. I think there's probably hundreds of ways that you can add increases or decreases to your work. So check the pattern that you're working on, see which kind they want you to do, but these are some basic ones if you wanted to know how that even works. The next thing people usually want to know is what they do if they drop a stitch. So dropping a stitch is where one of the stitches comes off your needles. Now, if you drop it like this and it hasn't gone anywhere, it hasn't come undone at all, then you can simply just put it back onto your needle. But if it's come off and then it's popped through and through and through, like that, that's going to be a big problem in your work. It is absolutely fixable though. If you have worked yourself past it, then you need to put something in it so it doesn't drop any further. A stitch marker works incredibly well for this job. Take your stitch marker, put it through that little loop that's there, the drop stitch, and that will hold on to that stitch until you're ready to fix it. So if you need to, you can work across and back and across until you get to this point where you are, it should be the next stitch, but it's dropped down. To fix it, you have 2 different tools. You have this lovely thing which is called a latch hook, and you can also use a crochet hook. A latch hook is exactly what it says. It's a hook with a latch on it, or you can use a crochet hook. Crochet hooks are a lot easier to find than a latch hook, and usually a lot cheaper. You might already have one. You just need to essentially re-knit this little loop back through these threads here. If we're doing this with a crochet hook, the crochet hook goes into that little extra stitch we've got there. It picks up the next extra dropped stitch and you're going to pull it through the loop. And then you're going to continue to pick up the next one and pull it through the loop. This is my preferred way of doing it. Good job. Another one. And then we're back on track and we can place it back onto our needles, back onto the needles, and we're exactly where we should be. No harm, no foul. So now we just keep going as though it was never dropped in the first place. So once you have finished knitting whatever your project is, then you need to cast off. And there are lots of ways to cast off, same as there are lots of ways to cast on. I'm going to teach you the simplest way. You're going to knit 2 stitches, 1, 2, then you're going to take the oldest stitch and you're going to fling it over and around the newest stitch. So now there's just one on. Stitch again, take the oldest, chuck it around and off the newest. Stitch again, over the top, leapfrog it, like that. Some people like to do that part by hand, some people like to do a crochet hook, but it's up to you. Okay, we're down to our last stitch on here. Every other one has been leapfrogged off. You know what I mean. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make this loop big, get rid of our needles, we don't need them, get some scissors, and we're going to cut our ball of yarn off. Goodbye, yarn. So now we have our tail and this large loop. What we're going to do is we're going to essentially do a slip knot, and we're going to pull this tail through that loop, and that knots it all together. There are more elegant ways of doing this, but this is the basic. This is the simple way of doing it, and now you can get a tapestry needle and you can weave in this end. The most important thing to do now is to wash this, and then you're going to lay it very flat. We call that blocking. It means that this should lay nice and flat and even and turn into a lovely little square rather than it's all crumply, silly mess that it is now. It is best before you block it that you weave the ends through, but don't cut the excess off. Blocking can stretch and warp a little bit, and having extra room with a tail for you to re-weave it back through is a good idea. So weave in, don't cut, then block. Weave in the ends. You need to be looking at the back of your work, and you need some kind of tapestry needle, like so. So you're going to thread on your tails. I find it easier if I fold them, rather than trying to push through the end, push through the middle. Then all that really matters when you're weaving it through is that you work on angles and that you come back at some point towards where you started over the top of at least one loop so that it can't pull out. So I'm going to go in and under on an angle, these little pearl bumps. And I tend to go sort of around. That'll do. Pull it through. Lovely. Can't see it from the front, only at the back. Then I'm going to make sure I go over the top of this one, back this way. So now it's nice and secure. And from there, you can go back to where you started, or you can just kind of start making some other little weaved sections. And that creates tension and friction, and then it won't or shouldn't come loose. This is another one of the reasons why using actual wool is your better option. Wool will start to felt together just a smidgy bit with use and with friction. And because of that slight felting, ever so slightly, it'll hold on to itself. It'll grip itself better because of the way the fibre is grown, created by the sheep. That doesn't happen with acrylics. Acrylics could and do often come apart more easily than wool. So we're going to leave our tail until after we've blocked. So now I can block this. To wash any kind of wool and to block it, all you need to do is fill up a bucket or container or a sink with warm water. It can be a little bit on the hot side. It's not going to wreck it. And then you need to put in some special wool wash. This is a gentler version of a wash, and it's better for things that are made from a protein fibre. Then pop your things in, let them soak for half an hour, rinse them off with clean water, and then lay them out to be blocked. You can use these special kind of foam mats, or you can lay them on top of a regular towel, and then you're going to leave them for at least 24 hours to dry fully. It doesn't take a lot of effort to actually wash things that are woolen. You just have to do less. There's no need for agitation. You just need to soak them, rinse them, and dry them flat. And once they have been dried, they come out like this. The pins that I put in them have helped hold them in the right shape, and now they are beautiful, flat, straight pieces of knitted fabric. The next type of cast on is a long tail cast on, and this is where we're going to use both this tail and our working yarn in order to cast on stitches. The long tail cast on is a straighter cast on. It's a lot easier to get your next stitches in for your next row, and it doesn't come apart quite as easily. So we're still going to start with a slip knot, but this time instead of it being at the end, it's halfway. So you need this half and this half. An easy trick to know how much you need is to pre-wrap your needle with how many stitches you plan to cast on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that I know is how much I need at least to do this cast on. Wrap around my fingers, push my working yarn up between them, creating a loop. Put the loop onto my needle, and then I'm going to make it firm, not tight. So we have our yarn on our needle, we have our working strand of yarn, and we have our tail. The tail is to the front, the working yarn is to the back. We're going to put our thumb and forefinger between the two strands, one on top of each, and then we're going to capture the rest of the strands into our other fingers. It sort of looks like a slingshot. Then we're going to do a little dance. So we're going to go under our thumb, creating the loop, over our main finger yarn and pull that new loop we've just created back down under the thumb. Release and pull. So doing it again, our yarn is on top of our finger and on top of our thumb. The rest is squeezed between our fingers. We're going under and grabbing this bottom part from under our thumb. Twist your hands over. Use the needle to grab that thread. Pull it down through the loop on your thumb. Let go and you have another loop. So we're going down, up, down, around, up, down, up. Just keep going round and round doing that until you have enough stitches. And there we have all of our stitches. You'll notice that this means that our tail is actually at this side, not down here. And now we can flip it over and we can start making our proper stitches into these. To create ribbing, which is essential for quite a lot of garments, as well as other projects, all you need to do is alternate your knit and your purl stitches. A 1x1 rib is knit, purl, knit, purl. A 2x2 rib is 2 knit, 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 purl. For this, I'm doing a 2x2 rib. So 2 knits, 2 purls, alternating all the way across. Swap my yarn to the back, knit for the front. Swap my yarn to the front, purl through the back. And then all the stitches that I just knit are now going to look like purls, and all the purls I just did look like knit stitches because they're the opposite way. The reason we do ribbing so much in knitting is because it creates an ultra stretchy piece of fabric. So if you add them to the ends of your cuffs of your tops, or if you add them to your neckbands, it means that they are able to stretch over things like your hands or your head, but then come back into a smaller shape. Ribbing does take longer to do though than regular flat stitches because of that movement of our yarn. This is where the Norwegian way of knitting can be really, really fast because you don't have to move the yarn between your different stitches. So here is our ribbing. As you can see, it creates a really stretchy fabric that comes back down to quite a small size. Even if we compare it with our other samples, you can see how much smaller the ribbing makes it appear to be. But it is the same amount of stitches. You can see how it tapers in and smushes where we've got our lovely ribbing, and then above that it's nice and flat where we have our plain rows of knitting. So now we're going to have a look at how we create lace in our knitting. Lace work is simply using yarn overs or little extra loops of yarn in order to create holes in our knitting. But when we create these, it adds stitches. And if you don't take those stitches away, your work's just going to get bigger and bigger. So we also need to knit some together, or whichever type of decrease you're using, so that our knitting doesn't get wider. So I'm going to do 3 stitches. Regular 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to yarn over and stitch 2 together. 2 together, thank you. Same thing. 1, 2, 2, 3, yarn over, knit 2 together. So now I have these extra big stitches here. You can see when I pull my knitting out a bit wider, that there are these funny looking loops here, here, and down here as well. These are going to create our little open gap because we've taken away the extra stitches by knitting 2 together. Our work hasn't gotten any wider. So now when we turn over, we're going to purl all the way across, including doing stitches into our yarn overs. They become our new stitches. Turn it over and you can see we've got big holes just stuck in there. So this time I'm going to do close to the same thing, but I'm just going to move where my yarn overs are so that it creates more of a pattern. I'm going to do 2 together, which is just another stitch, and you can do the decreases anywhere you want to. This just makes it more even. Again, we have to go back across our purl stitches in order to see how this looks. And for the reveal, dun, da, 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 we've now got more holes. As you can see, these ones are just off the other ones across. And that's how you do basic lace stitches. To create stripes, all you're going to do is start using another yarn as you were the previous one. I start out with mine as a bit of a loop into the back, making a cross. Pop that loop over the top of the cross, through the center, and pull the loop through. Then your next one, rather than it being a loop, you just want the main yarn, not that tail, go away. You want the main yarn up, over, round, out, and off. If you're doing stripes, you don't want to cut off your old yarn yet. You want to keep it on so that you can just pull it up at the side. On the back where the pearls are, you can see how they loop together. So we're just going to purl back across the same way. This part where it gets a bit tricky because they start getting a bit loose on the end here. So we're going to give them a little pull. Both the white and the blue, or both the previous thread and the new one. Now we turn it over. And we have a stripe. When we work the next one, we're going to trap our white yarn in behind. We're going to pop it over the top. We're not going to knit on it. It's just going to get trapped in between. Because it's through, it's going to get trapped. And that just means it'll work its way up the ladder with us. So into there. Our white yarn is just over the top. Make a loop with the blue. Adjust, adjust. And you can see that that white is now just tucked in behind the blue there. You will see a little bit of it on that side. So that's a choice. If you don't like the way that looks, then you will have to chop and keep doing ends. I personally would much rather see a little pop of white there than have to do ends, but that's me. And we've got 2 colors. So you can continue to change between the different colors, and that means that you're doing stripes. Lovely. But we're going to do a little bit of color work. Color work is where you follow a chart like pixels and you change between 2 or more different colors across the same row. 2 is easiest. Once you start getting to 3 in a single row, that can be quite tricky. There are several ways to hold your yarn. A lot of people who knit English style will leave them both down there and will just pick up whichever one they need to pick up in order to do the color work. I personally like to do one lever style, my regular style, and the other continental, and I find that easier. But I do it Norwegian continental style with the picking rather than the big flick. I'm going to do blue on my right hand, my dominant hand, and I'm going to do white in my picking hand. So I'm going to start off with one white and I pick it through. And then I'm going to do 3 blue. 1, 2, 3. 1 white, 3 blue. 1, 2, 3. And now we're going to flip. And this time we're doing pearls back across. For a lot of patterns, when they're flat like this and they're doing colour work, they will do the pearls all in one colour. But you'll also notice that a lot of colour work patterns are done in the round, and that's because doing it in the round means you don't have to deal with the pearl side. You can see that the white has left these big long legs going over the back. That is exactly what it's supposed to do. They're meant to look like that. These things here are called floats. It's where the yarn floats across the back without being seen at the front until that colour's turn. You may have heard or seen people talk about catching floats. I wouldn't stress about catching floats too much. It's an extra little skill. It's not a beginner skill, but it's not actually necessary. The reason we do it is so that when you're putting on and off a garment, you're less likely to catch your fingers or toes or anything else in the floats and wreck your jumper when you're wearing it. They are only necessary for that reason. The more you catch the floats, the less stretchy your knitting becomes, which is one of the superpowers of knitted things, is that they're a bit naturally stretchy. So you only need to do it if you're getting quite long. Some people say it's to do with the actual length. Some people, as in how long the floats are. Some people say it's per stitch, lots of different things. But in the end, it only matters if you've got lots of long floats and they're in a garment or an item that is taken on and off quite a lot. Doing it in jumpers, particularly around the yoke, is very helpful. It doesn't get caught in your hair or hair ties or glasses or things. Doing them in socks is almost pointless. It just means that the sock won't get on your foot. So I've moved my way back. It is best to do colour work in the round, like I said, otherwise it does look a bit funky, and trying to get your previous stitches up is a little tricky. So now that we've done our little pattern, I'm just going to take off my white and we'll finish off our blue. So now you can see that we have these lovely little white dots across here. They look like little V's because they're all knit stitches. And that's how you create colour work. And you can do big sections, small sections, you can create pictures, you can do pixel type pictures all through your work. It really is incredible. Again, this works much better when you're doing it in the round. That way you don't have to worry about trying to bring your yarns up the side, which can create issues with your tension and also just look a bit naff. But it can be done. It is just usually best done in the round. So now we're going to learn how to do a basic cable. Cables are basically switching which stitches are done first. And that crossover is what creates the cable look. Cables look best when they have purl rows on either side of the cable. It just gives a little bit more contrast and enables the cable to stand out. So for our 16, we're going to do 3 knit, 2 purl, 6 knit for our cable, 2 purl, 3 knit. So now we have our knits, purls, knits, purls, knits. When we flip over, we're going to do the opposite. Going to purl 3, knit 2, purl 6, knit 2, purl 3. When I turn it over, you can start to see the depression where we've got those little purl stitches. Let's see if we can see it better. So now we're going to make our cable. To work a cable stitch, I find it easier to have a cable needle, something like this. You don't have to use these. There's ways of doing it without it. I find that a little scary and far more likely for me to drop stitches. So I use a cable needle. This one is my favorite. There are lots of other kinds of cable needles, so just check the chapters down below if you want to have a look at the different kinds. We start off with our regular needle and we're going to do 3 knits and 2 purls. 1, 2, 3, 2 purls, 1, 2. Now that we're at our knit stitch section, we're going to take our cable needle and we're going to pass 3 stitches onto the cable needle. So I'm going to slip 3, 1, 2, 3, and I'm just going to hold them in the front. If you hold them in the back, the cable looks like it goes the other way around. I'm then going to knit 3 stitches using my normal needles. 1, 2, 3. I'm then going to go back to my cable needle, this one here, and I'm going to stitch these 3 stitches. This is where it gets a little tight. 1, 2, 3. And that's the end of using the cable needle for now. You can see that all the stitches look all bunched up together. I'm then going to go back and finish off my pattern. I'm then going to do a few rows as if the cable didn't happen, and it will help it lay nicely. So turn over, purl the pearls, knit the knits on this side. And it's starting to come together. So there we have our first little cable. If we continue this pattern, we're going to get more and more and more flips, which create this little over the top look. It looks like one's running underneath and another is going over the top. So here we have our lovely cables. Cables are probably one of the simplest things to do. They can be a little fiddly because of having the extra needle, but for the most part, it's just flipping it over and then knitting the same as you normally would. So that is how you do cables. Okay, so let's have a think about needles and the tools that we need in order to do knitting. Apart from needles and wool, there isn't really much that you need in order to knit, but there are lots of different types of needles that you can use. The most basic and the ones the most are familiar with are this type here. These are basic of the same needle and they each have numbers on them. And these numbers correspond in Australia to millimeters. This is how thick the needle actually is. And that will create how wide the gaps or the loops are of your knitting. Knitting needles can be made of lots of different things. Acrylic, metal, and wood are the most common. Straight needles come in pairs. And aside from those, you can also have cabled needles and double pointed needles. Cabled needles can come with the cables permanently attached, like this set here, or you can get a pack or individual of needles which come on and off the cables. This means that you have an infinite possibility of combinations of the needles as well as the length of the cables. Cables are really useful for decreasing the weight leveraged out from your needles if you need just 2. They also mean you can work in the round. You can also use double pointed needles for the same thing. But double pointed needles work by creating a square, and that square is knitted around. You're only ever using 2 at the same time, as in working with 2, and the others sit stationary, unused, as you're working your way around. Using double pointed needles is one of my favorite ways of knitting. The only other type of needle I have here is this specialty cable needle, which is specifically for socks. It has one long and one short end, and it creates a very little loop. When you're first starting out, it is best to go to an op shop or a thrift store, charity shop, and find someone else's old needles. These things can be used a million times. It's actually quite hard to break them, make them unusable, and it's a great way to start. However, if you have mobility or strength issues in your arms or hands, these can be difficult. I actually find them to be very tiring to use over a long period of time, particularly because I'm a lever knitter. So I prefer to use the ones on cables or the double pointed needles. As for the material, wooden needles are the most clingy to your wool as you are knitting. This means that you are less likely to drop stitches because it holds onto it a little bit for you. They're also very lightweight. Metal needles are very slippy, so you can work really fast if you have the speed and the practice to be able to do it. They are a lot heavier, but they do make that lovely sound as they click together. Metal needles also are very unlikely to ever be able to be damaged. They're very strong and durable, and they don't lose their points. They will always stay nice and relatively sharp to insert into your stitches. The final type is acrylic or plastic. These ones have a little bit more grip than the metal, but not as much as the wood. They are also lighter weight than the metal. So they're a nice in-between ground. They are, however, made of plastic, which means that they're a petrochemical product, and they definitely do lose their points. Unlike wooden needles, if plastic needles become dulled or get broken, they can only end up in landfill, whereas wooden needles can go in the compost, provided that you take the metal sections off of this type. My personal preference is for wooden needles whenever possible. I much prefer them to be lighter weight than anything else. Interchangeable needles are really easy to use. They have a screw end on the cable side, and you simply screw them together, making sure you're keeping them nice and straight so that the thread stays where it's meant to be. Once you have screwed it all the way down, you're given this little extra tool, and this pops straight into this little hole that's just here. And this gives you just a little bit of extra torque and grip to really secure that needle on. The other benefit of cables is that you're able to use these stoppers. You can put these on to hold your stitches onto your work and stop them from sliding off and dropping while in transport or while you're working on a different section of the project. There are lots of other accessories that can really help you in your knitting journey. You can use a knitting gauge to help you know how big your project is getting, but also how big your needles are if the numbers have rubbed off. Particularly if you're using secondhand, this can be incredibly valuable. These lovely little things here are stoppers for the ends of your needles. To stop your project from sliding off, you can take any of these and pop it on the end of your needles, which stops everything from coming off. They come in lots of different types. These are the ones that I sell in my shop, but there's all sorts. Another way of stopping your project from falling off needles or to hold the stitches is to use these very large safety pins. This is the smallest one I have, but they can come really big as well. Stitch markers can be really helpful in knitting. If you're a crocheter like I was, then you may not understand how important stitch markers are, but for knitting, these are really important. Some of these are ones that I sell in my shop. These ones are some lovely ones that I've bought. They usually come in a detachable fashion. These are sort of earring clips that they've used. Mine have these little safety pins. They can also come with thread ones. This is one that I bought in Norway recently. And then they can also come as closed little loops. Any of these are fine. I find the ones you can open and close to be slightly more useful for lots of different parts of knitting, but you definitely do need something. You can, however, just use some scrap yarn. Something that you can't be without is a tapestry needle of some kind to weave in your ends. The plain silver kind are fantastic, and these usually come really cheaply. I have some fancy ones too. This one has an eye that moves and is flexible, and these ones have a little kink at the end to help you get up in under stitches. You'll also need something to cut your yarn with. You can, of course, just use scissors. I personally love fancy scissors. Or you can get these incredibly useful little snips. This one, it's got a little blade hidden in there that's safely tucked away, and you can just put your yarn through it and chop it using that. This one has even a little pin so that you can hook it to the inside of a project bag or even to your top and show it off proudly as a badge. The only other accessory that I can recommend getting is something to get the fluffy bauble bits off your projects once you start using them. This one is from the Sunday Knitting Club in Helsinki. You simply run it across your knitting and it takes all the little fuzzy bits off and leaves your knitting nice and flat and free of little baubles. If you're wanting to do any kind of cable knitting, you can get yourself a cable needle. I find them very helpful. You don't have to use a cable needle in order to do cable stitches in your knitting, but it's really helpful, particularly if you're a beginner. There are lots of different kinds. There are some that are completely straight. You can also just use a double pointed needle if you have an extra. I love these ones that are the big hook. I find them to be the most secure. And then you also have these that have a little bit of a dip in them so that they can hold onto your stitches without them dropping off. If you do drop stitches, there are two tools that you can use. One is a latch hook, the other is a crochet hook. So if you already have crochet hooks in your collection, then this is a really great thing to use. Getting a latch hook can be helpful. It's a more secure way of fixing your mistakes, but a crochet hook works well as well. So this is my current work in progress, or WIP. And there's a couple of things I was going to show you on this. Excuse me, Kalia. First is how I've used these extra cables with the stoppers. This is going to be a sleeve eventually. This is the start of it. Sleeve will come out. And whilst I'm working on the body of my new jumper, I have put cable through the sleeve stitches, and it's got these little stoppers on the end so that it just holds on and I don't have to do anything else with it. And all I'll need to do is attach the needles on either side and then continue to knit and add stitches in. I'll pick up stitches, which is where you just use the loops that are here to create new stitches, and then you keep working and you've got a sleeve. So for the body of my jumper, which is very large, of course, goes around your whole body, and this is one big cable that is in here, and it's holding all the stitches, and then there are my 2 needles on the end, and then I have my stoppers on the end of my needles to make sure that my stitches don't fall off anywhere while I'm transporting this big thing. And then I also have a couple of stitch markers on here. This one is kept in the same place and it moves along each row with me as I stitch up or down, and it just holds in place where my first stitch is. So this is where I know I'm starting the row again. This one here was put in place when I was measuring, and I know to that point there at the start of the stitch marker was 50 centimeters. And then I was able to add in a bit more to make sure that my jumper was long enough. So that's the 2 different ways that you can at least 2 different ways that you can use stitch markers. So this one just gets passed between my needles as I work around, which is why it's on the cable. And this one is permanently attached to the stitch, which is why having this opening version is really helpful. I also have one up here, and this was the start of my row, and I just kept it in there as it moved down, and then I moved it to that spot so I knew where I was starting when I changed from doing my ribbing to doing the plain knitting with the increases that I've added in here for the raglan. So this is where it's become bigger and more stitches were added each time I moved down different rows. The other thing that I'll show you is my mistake, because I'm leaving it in, and I think that's important to acknowledge when you're learning to knit. It's fine to leave in mistakes if you want or need to. So everything looks fine and normal, but actually just here I have missed a yarn over. Can you see that? Hopefully. Even more. Right here I've missed a yarn over. So we've got a hole here in my lace work, and then there's no hole, and then there's a hole. There's meant to be one there, and I've decided I'm going to leave it. I think that sometimes it's not worth going back to fix mistakes. This is still just as wearable. It fits just as well. I don't think that it's worth the time and effort it would take to go all the way back up to take that out and then put it back in and then do all of this work all over again. I just don't think it's that big of a deal. And again, it's not changing the fit. So that's what it is. But there it is. So now we need to consider the fun stuff, the yarn. There are so many different types and varieties of yarn that you can use in your knitting or crochet. It definitely doesn't need to be acrylic. I personally don't like acrylic. I don't want to use petrochemicals, particularly petrochemical textiles and fabrics. So why would I make it using that stuff? So instead I opt for natural materials when possible. Here is just a selection of different natural materials that I thought I would show you that you can have in your yarn. So let's start off with the easy and obvious ones. This scarf here is made using wool, is actually made using local wool from a local farm that is small milled and then hand dyed. And I think it's really, really beautiful because it's got all this variegation in the colour. I'll put a link to their farm. It's Cherry something. It's a fairly close to Melbourne based business, and they go to a lot of local shows. Aside from plain wool, generic wool, there's also wool like this, which is a more rustic style wool. This wool has been spun in the oil, which means that it still maintained a level of lanolin from the sheep that grew the wool, and it means it's actually really good for your hands as you're knitting it and makes your hands really beautiful and soft. And then when you've finished, you're able to wash it, but then it still maintains some level of that oil in it, which is great for your skin as well as for the wool itself, which means that it has a longer life and it's harder wearing. This is quite a hard wearing wool as well because it's a bit more rustic. This can mean it's a little bit more itchy. It also means it's unlikely to ever get damaged by anything, and it's very warm. This is a sock yarn. It's made from merino wool. Merino wool is incredibly soft type of wool. It has a really low micron count, which means it's really soft, which is lovely against your skin. This has actually been spun together with some nylon, which is a synthetic petrochemical textile. But in the case of socks, we put it in there so that they can maintain strength. You don't need it though, depending on the type of wool that you use. If you use a more rustic wool, unlike merino, which is very soft, then it's a far hardier type of wool and it is unlikely to break. You could also, instead of having nylon, have nettle. So this yarn here is a combination of wool and nettle fibre, which is also called ramie if you're looking for it. And the ramie or nettle gives the wool a lot of extra strength, similar to nylon, but it's in a natural form. Often companies don't use ramie or nettle because it's a more laborious task to harvest it, but it's not crazy hard. It's just one of those things with petrochemical companies and them wanting to push us to use unnatural fibres. There you go, that's another option. This scarf here is made with alpaca. Alpaca is incredibly soft, beautifully soft, but also crazy level warm. So if you're in a country like mine where you don't need super warm things, this can be a little much depending on where you're trying to wear it. When we were overseas in the Nordics, this was fantastic, but I would imagine having an entire jumper made out of this in my country wouldn't be great. However, in other countries, it would be incredible. This beanie, which was my first beanie that I ever knit, this is made of a combination of a small amount of merino mixed with yak and silk. And it is so luxuriously soft. I adore this beanie. And I think that yak is really underrated as well. It's a lovely yarn to use. So this is a crochet glove, but this yarn is very interesting. It's a little bit of wool mixed with possum fur. It's from New Zealand, and in New Zealand, possums are actually a pest. They have come over from Australia or been brought over, and they are causing all sorts of havoc. So they need to get rid of them, and one of the ways that they're helping to do that is by turning their fur into yarn. This wool here, which is from Knitting for Olive, is a soft silk mohair, which contains 70% mohair and 30% cruelty-free silk, which is important in terms of how it's harvested. So mohair is from goats, and then silk is made by a special type of worm that creates it as its cocoon. Because this is cruelty-free, it means that they wait to harvest the cocoon until the bug has finished using it, and then the bug is able to continue their life in their normal lifespan. Then I have a couple of plant-based fibres. This one here is a cotton fibre. I dyed it with a weed called dox, which you can find in a lot of places around Australia and the UK. It is not native to Australia, but it is everywhere. So you can definitely grab it and you can use it to dye some yarn. This beautiful pinky, rusty, orange, brown colour that I think is stunning. This yarn is a combination of acrylic with soybean fibre, which I think is so interesting that you can turn soybeans into a type of fibre. And then the last one, which is one of my hand-dyed yarns, this one is actually bamboo, which is quite a common fibre actually for a lot of different types of things. Rayon and things can often be made with bamboo. This one is made with bamboo and also with merino. Because it's made with bamboo, it is incredibly lustrous. It's got this really nice shininess to it, which you sort of don't expect from something that's wool or yarn, but it is very shiny. There are honestly hundreds of other fibres that you could make things out of. I have some for spinning, which include mint and rose, lotus root fibre, camel, all sorts of different fibres that you can use in the world. You are not just stuck to wool, acrylic or cotton. Again, I'm going to emphasize that I don't think the use of acrylic in handmade things is great. I think we were tricked into that a long time ago, and it's time to move away from it and move back to what our ancestors used and what we have available, which is actually thousands of options, and all of them have their own amazing properties and interesting abilities, and we should be exploring those more. So get out there and find something interesting, particularly if you're able to support small local businesses, farmers, fibre production mills and also hand dyers, that would be amazing. Yarn will come in either of two ways. One is a ball and the other is a skein. A skein is actually not ready to work from. You need to turn it into a ball. To do this, you need to undo the yarn. It's wound up so that it comes together into this, and then you need a special contraption, which is this thing, and this is called a swift. You don't actually have to use this, but if you don't have it, it's slightly more complicated. From there, you can roll that up into a ball like this, or you can get yourself a ball winder, and this turns around, pulls the yarn onto it and creates a very nice cake of yarn, which is a type of ball of yarn, which can be pulled from the center or from the outside. Skeins like these are most common when you're looking at hand-dyed yarn. Balls like this are usually made from larger manufacturers. They can also look like these ones here, but your choice is more about the actual yarn you want. We're going to finish off with some knitting practice, and I have a couple of nursery rhymes that you can use to help yourself remember how to do the knit stitches. In through the front door, sweep around the room. Back through the same door, put away the broom. Jack goes in, puts on his scarf, goes back out and takes it off. Down through the rabbit hole, run around the tree. Out of the rabbit hole, away hops she. These are available for download from my website. If you would like a printout version, they're free, of course. You just have to have a look on my blog. There are a couple more there, including one that is slightly less child-friendly. I hope that you enjoyed learning those and that they help you practice your knitting. So we're doing the same thing, starting again into the top loop, through it, and putting your needle behind that first needle. Pick up your yarn, wrap it around, down into that X on top of the previous loop. Use your working needle to go down and pull up the new loop, and then chuck the old one off. My number one first top tip for knitting is that your first project shouldn't be something you plan to use or wear. Make something that you don't care about the end product of, just to get through the process of learning the stitches. Make lots of mistakes, and that way you're not going to be stressed about those mistakes and trying to fix them and do something perfectly, because you don't need to yet. You're learning. This is a skill that you're learning for life. It's going to take time. You need to give yourself the grace and the time and the patience to do that. I did it. I made this ugly thing, and when I look at all of the mistakes, and there are like hundreds of them, that's great. I now look at this as something that shows my progress and how far I've come. There's all sorts of drop stitches and funny looking things everywhere, places where I didn't know what I was doing, and I've made funny looking things, and that's great. There's no problem with it at all. It turned into a scarf because it just kept growing. As I learnt stitches and got better at them, I would then switch the stitch rather than stopping and trying to make everything perfect and going back. Didn't matter. I just made this, and now it lives in perpetuity as this thing that I made to learn from, not for something that I'm going to try and wear out in the world. And that's my number one top tip. Number two top tip is to use lifelines when you are making something particularly a wearable. A lifeline is where you thread through an extra piece of yarn to hold stitches onto, and you keep knitting past it. But then if you make a mistake, like you drop a stitch, there's an issue with the lace work or something else, you can rip back, pull out back to that point, and it's got all the stitches held nicely for you if you need them. If you never need the lifeline, that's fine. At the end of making the project, you just take it out. My final top tip is to learn to laugh at yourself and at your work. Rather than taking it so seriously, trying to create this perfect thing, have a bit of humor with it. it's okay to look at your mess up bits and have a giggle. You're not going to make everything perfectly. That's kind of the point. It's actually doing the process of the knitting that we're here for. It's part of what makes it mindful and joyful. It's the experience of doing it. If you wanted something perfect, then you could buy something that's made with a machine. That's not what we're here for. We're here to make something that is interesting and unique and special. And the process of making it is really what makes it so special. Laugh off the mistakes and just keep going. It's also okay not to fix the mistakes. You don't actually have to take the mistakes out and try and fix them. So long as it's still usable or wearable, it doesn't matter. Get rid of the perfectionist mindset and move on. Okay guys, so that's the end of the video today, learning all the basic things you need to know in order to get knitting. Let me know in the comments, what is the first project that you are going to make after your knitting sampler? What is the first project that you are going to actually make to keep? I'd love to know what you're going to start working on. If you did like this video, make sure that you like and subscribe and leave me a comment as well. All those things really help me out. They help out the algorithm so that other people can find my videos, and it helps to support the channel and all my work that I do here. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today and coming and sitting down and learning all about knitting. And as always, learn lots, be kind, and make something. See you later.